Alright, so hello and welcome back. So today we're going to continue with Baz Battles. He makes great stuff. Last time we left off, we watched the failed invasion of Norway by Germany, basically, and losing a heavy cruiser, the Blucher. And now we're going to take a look at the Battle of the Denmark Strait in 1941, which is the very famous battle where the Bismarck goes down. So, try to add as much as I can to this. Otherwise, see if you guys like this stuff, like all that stuff. Thank you to my patrons. Let's go.
It's late spring of the year 1940. Following the rapid overwhelming of France and Low Countries, which gained Germany an unchallenged position in continental Europe, Hitler now attempts to knock the last major power in Europe out of the war. Yet the ensuing battle for domination over British skies proved the valor of the Royal Air Force pilots and capability of British industry, resulting in a first major defeat for the German war machine. Independent from these air operations above the English Channel and British soil, the German Kriegsmarine challenged the mighty power of the Royal Navy over its long-standing hegemony at sea. This daunting task was of vital importance to the Germans, as Great Britain, though a global power, being an island nation, was heavily dependent on imported goods and raw materials. Thousands of commerce vessels crossed the Atlantic every month, helping to keep the British economy running, and both directly and indirectly supporting its war effort. Of course, the Germans were fully aware of this vulnerability, and since the war broke out in 1939, one of the main tasks of the considerably weaker but rapidly expanding Kriegsmarine was to undermine British sea commerce and thus hinder its military industry and economic potential.
At least that was the theory of how the Kriegsmarine was supposed to operate. Technically, Admiral Raeder, who was in command of the Kriegsmarine, especially during this time, it was not Dönitz, he wanted to build basically Plan 45. There's a lot of things you can call it, Plan Z, which basically recreate the High Seas Fleet from World War One. And Hitler gave him approval in 1939 and promptly declared war on Poland and started World War Two. So he was kind of shocked. He did not have the fleet he wanted. He basically had the Gneisenau, the Scharnhorst, and the Admiral Hipper class. Very handful of U-boats that could operate. You could get like 5 or a little bit more out in operation against the British, and the others had to be refitted or in dry dock. And Dönitz, obviously before the war wanted 100 U-boats. 100 U-boats, I won't say knock Britain out of the war. I don't know. I will say it would have hurt them a lot more, considerably a lot more, if they had 100 U-boats instead of 2 battleships and a couple heavy cruisers that basically do nothing. Not do nothing. I'll get to the fleet and being thing in a minute, but that's what they basically did, unfortunately. Now, the Battle of Britain went on. Germany could have done a lot more damage if they did certain things. Britain wins, okay? Britain now has air control, more or less, of its own skies, and has his radar that can now see out into somewhat of the shipping lanes and can also start somewhat doing ASW, and at least providing the Royal Navy with eyes in the sea. And also the Kriegsmarine's been tasked with fighting the Royal Navy, which, fun fact, has all of its ships from World War One. Basically, the old ones have been decommissioned. It's got all those. It's got all the new ones it built. So yeah, you're taking on like the world's #1 naval power at this time. The U.S. will catch up. Don't worry, we'll catch up. Well, the U.S. probably give them a good second, and then we'll obviously take over at first. And then you have Germany that's really, really, really far behind.
This spanning sea campaign, known today as the Battle of the Atlantic, lasted for nearly 6 years and had a crucial impact on the war in Europe.
And that is something that people don't really talk about a lot. Technically, the Battle of the Atlantic didn't end until 45, so it was the longest quote-unquote battle of World War II that continuously went on. And a lot of people, a lot of merchant marines gave their lives to, get cargo to the United Kingdom, get cargo to Europe, basically. And I'll say it's around 1943. You could say 42. U.S. comes in and gets decked on. 43, 44, and 45. I mean, by 45, it's basically completely over. 44, it's also basically completely over. And 43 is when they really start sinking a lot of U-boats.
It is to this backdrop that our story unfolds. It is the 21st of March of 1941. 2 German battleships, the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, sailed back to the port of Brest following their moderately successful 60-day-long raid on Allied trading lanes. This action served 2 purposes: the tying down of a significant portion of the British home fleet with the presence of German capital ships loose on the northern Atlantic, and also to serve as support for a small yet deathly effective U-boat fleet, which at the time was highly successful, performing its mission to hunt down Allied merchant convoys crossing the Atlantic.
And this is true. Okay, so this, what they're doing right now, technically is raiding or interdictions. Now, we're missing the whole part where the Gneisenau and the Stormers has to literally go around the United Kingdom to get to Brest, because going down this way would have been straight suicide. But don't worry, we'll get there in another video where they go back that way. But operating with subs, they're using battleships technically as commerce raiders. Now, you can see that these have 9 280mm guns. Okay, the reason this is kind of a problem is because these guns are 11-inch guns, and the British have 16 to 15-inch guns, 16-inch guns. They got 14-inch guns. These are severely underarmed for basically battleships, which is what they were. Okay, they had the armor to sustain a lot of hits and a lot of damage. They just didn't have the guns, so you could technically call them a battlecruiser, but the Germans called them battleships, the British called them battleships or battlecruisers, depending on the day. The problem is their guns. They can't stand up. They really cannot stand up in a toe-to-toe fight against a Royal Navy ship that's equivalently modern, okay? The problem is Royal Navy has a lot of battleships. Yeah, the problem is not a lot of them are modern. They have the King George V class, so Prince of Wales, King George V, Howe, Anson. They have those, okay? They also have the Hood, but it wasn't modernized, so I wouldn't, what happens to the Hood. But these are very advanced battleships, especially for their time. They have problems because Germany never fully developed their naval industry or recovered it. That's why they have these guns, is because Germany didn't have the ability to build 15-inch guns until way later when you get Bismarck and Tirpitz. But raiding with battleships is not really a good idea, mostly because their entire fleet is out there looking for you. And if you get caught, you got 2 versus their whole home fleet. But, I'll continue that in a minute.
Which at the time was highly successful, performing its mission to hunt down Allied merchant convoys crossing the Atlantic. The German Naval Command, under Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, was pleased with the results of the sortie, which either captured or destroyed 22 ships, and immediately decided to carry out yet another commerce raid, but this time utilizing all 4 modern German battleships. Such force operating on the Atlantic could pose a formidable threat not only to Allied commerce convoys, but even for the British Royal Navy. But this plan, dubbed Operation Rheinübung, faced certain difficulties from the onset. Both Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were out of action for at least several months due to engine and torpedo damage respectively, while the newest battleship, the Tirpitz, was still undergoing crew training. This meant that the only fully operational capital ship at the time was the pride of the German Navy and leading ship of her class, the Bismarck.
So let me talk about his plan for a minute, okay? On paper, it sounds like a good idea. There are problems with this. First, you have to get the Tirpitz and the Bismarck to Brest, or at least the west side of France, from Germany. 2 ways you can go through: the English Channel, or you go the long way around. You go the long way around if you don't want to die, because you can't go through the English Channel, because that's suicide. But we'll get to that amazing feat of British incompetence and German sheer will later. But you're going to have to go around. Problem: Scharnhorst, Gneisenau need months of repair and refit to become operational again, and you got Tirpitz that's still undergoing crew training. So, to launch an operation like this, Bismarck is the only one that's going to be able to go. That's a problem. If Bismarck is the only one that can go, that means it can really be outnumbered by the British Royal Navy. They got the battleships and battlecruisers, and you need 2 to 1, 3 to 1 against the Bismarck. That's doable, okay? And if the Tirpitz isn't there, it can't support the Bismarck. And you do not want to keep doing multiple runs of this. Bismarck and Tirpitz, my opinion, naval person, should go together with Prince Eugen and whatever heavy cruisers you have. However, this also brings up another problem. Because of where Brest is located, which is on the western side of France, if you position all of these battleships on the western side of France, guess what? The Royal Navy can position all of their ships to counter you legitimately. If you do it spread out like this, as not beneficial as it is, it technically makes the Royal Navy keep ships on the east side of England and the west side of England to counter all of you because they don't exactly know where you are.
And Admiral Raeder was determined to have his capital ships raiding the Atlantic convoys as soon as possible, because he wanted to avoid the expected cuts on the naval budget in light of the upcoming German invasion of the Soviet Union, where the Kriegsmarine wouldn't play any significant role. He opposed the idea of opening the Eastern Front, believing that it was the United Kingdom which posed the greater threat to German hegemony in Europe. Regardless, preparations for the Bismarck sortie into the Atlantic began. The only other serviceable ship with enough endurance for such a mission was the Prince Eugen, an Admiral Hipper-class heavy cruiser, which was subsequently added to the Bismarck's task force. Raeder appointed trustworthy Admiral Gunther Lütjens to
We'll get to Goose Lucians in a minute, but technically Prince Eugen and Admiral Hipper could have gone. Blucher is at the bottom of Norway at this point. And I believe almost all of their commerce raiders, Scheer, Deutschland, and the other one, I believe, are all sunk at this point. So yeah, Germany's Kriegsmarine is not looking exactly amazing.
take command of Operation Rheinübung, who soon raised his flag on the Bismarck.
And you can see the Bismarck actually has 15-inch guns, 380 millimeters. So you can see the Prince Eugen has 8 203s, and the Scharnhorst Eisenhower have 11 230 millimeters, so 11-inch guns.
Raeder wanted to begin the operation in late April, during a new moon period and with favorable low visibility conditions. However, due to a couple of issues with the Prince Eugen, both ships remained in port until the middle of May. Worth mentioning is that Lütjens tried to change Raeder's mind regarding the upcoming sortie, and he advised Raeder to wait until at least one of the 3 unavailable capital ships could join the Bismarck's mission. Lütjens, more than anyone else, was aware of the danger the sortie could spark, as he had commanded the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau's successful Atlantic raid months earlier. Yet Raeder was unable to yield to Lütjens' wishes, and he instead convinced Lütjens of the necessity of the presence of German capital ships on the Atlantic.
And, okay, so Lütjens is right here. Even Raeder technically knows Lütjens is right. Waiting for your other battleship, as I said, the Tirpitz is a valid option and should be pursued because this is such a risky operation where they have to go around the UK and get to Brest, basically. And he wants to wait till that ship or the Gneisenau and the Scharnhorst are operational. If the Gneisenau and Scharnhorst are operational, they can go raid, which will draw the British fleet out to go pursue them while you can get your other fleet here. It's basically a distraction. But that's not an option because Operation Barbarossa is coming up, and the Kriegsmarine basically needs to show that they can actually do something to keep their funding, and this is it. So, again, politics always playing a part in military decisions.
Even if it meant just one battleship would be involved in this operation. Late in the evening of the 18th of May, the Prince Eugen departed Gotenhaven, and 5 hours later was followed by the Bismarck. Both ships rendezvoused in the western Baltic, and with the assistance of 3 destroyers, they steamed through the Great Belt, heading to the Norwegian Sea. Yet Lütjens' operation didn't remain unnoticed for too long. While passing through Kattegat, the German battle group was sighted by a Swedish seaplane cruiser. A day later, while refueling in a fjord near Bergen, was again sighted by a British reconnaissance Spitfire. Lütjens expected that the British could already know that the Bismarck was off port, but the German air reconnaissance reports that he received on the 22nd of May stated that the Royal Navy ships were still anchored in Scapa Flow Naval Base.
Okay, so basically they could use the Kiel Canal, but I mean, that's not an option really. So they have to go around the Denmark Strait. When they do that, Sweden reports uh, to itself and to the Allies, technically, because they can intercept their transmissions, that they see the Bismarck. And if the Bismarck's out, the UK, can send planes, general last known location, and they see it. Now, the home fleet, okay? The home fleet, as of right now, because, again, the UK is also fighting in Africa, so they have to divide their fleet up there. So, right now we have HMS Hood, the battle cruiser, okay? An old ship, but still pretty good. One of the last World War One battle cruisers to really be finished. It was not refitted, though. That's a problem. If it was refitted, probably would have served the battle. You can look at Drachenfeld's battle thing on that. You got HMS King George V, a modern battleship. You got HMS Prince of Wales, a modern battleship. You have HMS Victorious, believe is a at least semi-modern carrier. And the Germans don't have any carriers, so you can see that that is a pretty potent force right there. And Scapa Flow is also the main British naval base, just flat out. That's just the main naval base for the entire British fleet, really, and it has been for many decades at this point.
In the Orkneys. This information possibly dispelled Lucian's doubts, and he led both ships to the Denmark Strait, hoping that worsening weather would help the German ships to break out into the Atlantic unseen. In the evening of the 23rd of May, they reached the ice limit and set course along Greenland's coast. Though the Denmark Strait was officially 200 nautical miles wide, in late spring it was still considerably obstructed by pack ice, which basically halved its effective width. Soon, despite bad weather and low visibility, the German battle group encountered the HMS Suffolk, a British heavy cruiser.
Now, if you are German and you are thinking that heavy fog and visibility like this of basically near zero would help you, this is technically true. However, Germany will continue to underestimate how much radar is going to play a part, okay? It's not like Germany was stupid and didn't know what radar was. They did. They just didn't have the same technology levels that the British and later the Americans and the British would have. And basically, the British can see in ridiculously low visibility because of radar, which, again, at this point is pretty new invention. And it really does give you a massive advantage, especially when you cannot see really anything in the naval theater.
Equipped with a new type of radar that was tracking them. She soon took cover in the fog, but it was clear for Lucians that their operation was no longer a secret and that the intelligence reports of a few days earlier were false. An hour later, the Bismarck spotted another heavy cruiser to its port side, the HMS Norfolk, and Lucians gave the command to open fire immediately.
You do not want to be Lucians in this position. This is a horrible position to be in. You have been spotted. You know for a fact that the Royal Navy is coming. You know for a fact that they are going to be coming for you. Okay, if you've been spotted and being tracked, and it looks like there are two heavy cruisers on you already, and they can see you, and you really can't see them, it's a very bad position for you to be in, and he's going to fire the Norfolk to try to drive them away at least.
Salvos were fired, but none of them scored a direct hit. Despite this, the Norfolk was unable to fight on equal terms with the much stronger warship, so she set a smokescreen and retreated into the fog. Still, thanks to the Suffolk's radar, the British cruisers were able to trace the German group. Lucians was informed that the Bismarck's radar was malfunctioning due to the force of the blasts from her own powerful artillery. As a result, he ordered the Prince Eugen to take the lead.
Now, this is going to be very important. Unintentionally important. Bismarck had a lot of wire control issues. You can look at Drachenfeld's video on the Bismarck, but basically they didn't wire it right. You fired the guns, you knocked out your own radar and fire control systems. It was a whole issue. But the British, last time they saw, was Bismarck in front, Prince Eugen in the back. Okay, that's usually how you run ships of this nature. Heaviest ships in front, and then you got your lighter ships on the back. Okay, usually how you run it. Then we're getting into scouting and escorts, and I'm not going to get into that. But now they're switching. Last time the British know of this is Bismarck in front, Prince Eugen in back. In reality, it's going to be Prince Eugen in front and Bismarck in back, which is going to cause problems for the British.
At this point, he could have tried to turn back and retreat to the Norwegian Sea, but being encouraged by the bad weather, he decided to continue the mission and steam southwest, hoping to shake off the British cruisers during the night.
And I don't know how much of he could have turned back at this point, because really at this point there is no turning back. You're already around Iceland. At this point, if you turn around to Norway, it's possible. However, it's also very possible for the Royal Navy to have already set their ships out and they would engage you in the Norwegian Sea before you can get to German air cover. And it might just be very well for you to just gun it for Brest. And he's going to choose to gun it for Brest, at least at this point.
Lutyens anticipated that the Royal Navy's capital ships were either too far away to intercept his task force or were still anchoring at Scapa Flow. It was a risky but still viable plan. Unfortunately, the bad news was still coming. 6 hours later, at dawn, the Prince Eugen's hydrophones detected the propeller noises of 2 ships on her port side. Lutyens expected another 2 British cruisers, but as these warships got closer, he realized from the size of their superstructures that heavier units were about to challenge him.
And this is what I mean. Even if he turned back and let's just say he had foresight or something, they still would have been able to catch up to him. At least with Hood, and because they're already on the intercept course. I don't think at this point. I mean, you can't really just be like, yeah, he was wrong to continue the mission at this point. I mean, he really didn't have an option to go back.
Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland was approaching the German battle group with a force consisting of 2 capital ships in the lead. The mighty battlecruiser HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, and a brand new battleship, the HMS Prince of Wales. The reason behind Holland's aggressive course lay in the characteristics of the Hood's armor. Though her main belt armor was thick, the deck received relatively little protection, leaving the ship vulnerable in long-distance exchanges, where the plunging fire could easily penetrate the armor of her deck.
And this is important because Hood never received her refit that she should have, okay? If she had received her refit, deck armor would have been increased and you could have exchanged fire. Because you really, technically with a battlecruiser, you don't want to get this close to a battleship because that's just asking for problems, because a battlecruiser is meant to engage everything below a battleship and win. Engaging a battleship is risky, and usually long-range fire is what you want to do with a battlecruiser, but in this case, they need to close the distance. That is why these 2 are in front and they're closing the distance, because they still have other units that will assist them, but they're just not in the area yet, and they need to intercept the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen, because this might actually be their only time to intercept them before they lose them again.
Being over 12 miles away, the British ships opened fire with their forward turrets. While the Prince of Wales correctly tracked the more dangerous threat of the Bismarck, the Hood mistakenly aimed at the Prince Eugen, which was leading the line and had quite a similar silhouette to the Bismarck's.
And remember, the last report was Bismarck in front, Prince Eugen in the back, okay? So going off of that assumption, which is probably what the Admiral had, he's engaging the front target. You also technically do not want to divide fire, or you do not want to focus fire. And the reason for this is very simple. If both the Prince of Wales and the Hood focus fire on the Bismarck, especially at this time, they're going to end up with a lot of shell splashes. And they cannot tell, this is World War II technology, if there are shells exploding around the Bismarck and you are both firing, you cannot tell which shell is where and who is firing at what, okay? This was a really big problem. So really radar gun ranging and radar gun finding were used by the USA to help eliminate this problem. But these splashes, if you're both firing, you don't know who is short, who is long, where you need to correct. That's why you usually engage single targets. So if Prince of Wales is firing, they can see they shot over, so they can correct to shoot under, or shoot at the Bismarck, and if they shoot under, they can go up. If you're both firing, it's not possible. You also do not want to leave a target unengaged. If a crew is being engaged by big shells, they're more likely to suffer a significant emotional event. And if they're not being shot at, they can take more aimed shots at you. So you want to really divide your fire here.
British initial salvos missed, and soon the Prince of Wales had to fight with malfunctioning armaments, a somewhat expected teething pain. In the meantime,
and the reason that happened is because they were experimenting with quadruple 14-inch guns on the Prince of Wales and the King George V class as an entirety, and basically it broke down. So one of the forward guns broke down, which the configuration on the Prince of Wales was two guns. Okay, two on the bottom, four on a turret above, and then you had four, I believe, in the back. And that was its armament. So technically 10 guns, but they'd have to turn to use it now.
The Hood's next salvos were much closer, throwing splinters across the Prince Eugen's boards. But the German guns remained silent. Lütjens was reluctant to return fire, even though it seemed that engagement was unavoidable. He still had Raeder's orders in mind, which urged him to avoid encounters with equal British units at all costs, as his primary mission was commerce raiding. But it seemed that there was no way out.
And his hesitation to fire here may seem like, why don't you just shoot at the people shooting at you? And I kind of agree with you, but you also have to think. The Bismarck does not get ammo. It has to go back, or that ammo has to be delivered from Germany all the way to France, okay? So if he's going to shoot at these units, he's not going to have enough ammo to basically do commerce raiding after this, which was the whole point of doing this operation. You can see his hesitation there.
His artillery officers made a number of requests to open fire, but Lütjens first took the time to ensure that both of his ship's armaments were aiming at the Hood, and then waited until the optimal moment to strike. Eventually, the Bismarck's guns roared in a full broadside fire.
And what he's doing right here is waiting for them to get so close that theoretically, both of you firing at the target, you should at least, because the difference in the gun splashes, like how big your guns are, means how big of a splash it is. So Prince Eugen's are technically small enough to you can differentiate the explosion height to determine if your battleship guns are hitting somewhere versus the Prince Eugen. And focusing fire on a single target, again, more likely chance to hit.
Followed by the Prince Eugen's salvo shortly thereafter. The initial fire yielded immediate results, as the Prince Eugen scored a direct hit on the Hood, with a high explosive shell causing a substantial fire on board.
And I'm not get into naval techniques here because that's a different video, but again, if you stagger fire, for example, if Bismarck fires full salvo and then Prince Eugen waits 5 seconds, fires full salvo, Bismarck's shells will splash, you can correct off of that, and then Eugen's shells will splash, and you can correct off of that. But that requires a lot of coordination and a lot of crew training to do so.
At this point, the British shells of the Prince of Wales finally reached the Bismarck, penetrating her bow and causing a fuel leak. The Germans still held the advantage, firing full broadside while the Prince of Wales used just half of her guns, and the Hood still mistakenly concentrating her fire on the Prince Eugen. Vice Admiral Holland ordered both of his ships to turn to port so all British guns could shoot at the Germans, thus equalizing the encounter.
Which is what you do in the situation. You either pull out or you get broadside, and he's going broadside.
But virtually a minute later, the unexpected happened. From a distance just short of 9 miles, the Bismarck's fifth salvo reached its target, and one or more shells penetrated the Hood's deck, seemingly without effect. British gunnery officers believed it was a dud, but seconds later, an enormous magazine explosion tore the mighty Hood in two. The explosive effect of the Bismarck's momentous direct hit left German sailors staring in awe, but Admiral Lütjens remained calm and unmoved. Within the next 3 minutes, the blazing pride of the Royal Navy, and for a long time the biggest warship of the world, disappeared from the ocean's surface.
Think about that. 3 minutes and over 2,000 people die, if I remember correctly. There were 3 survivors from Hood, and you can watch again documentaries on that. But one of them was a signalman, and when they got hit, and the ship was going down, his officer, because he was on the observers, observer on the not the crow's nest, but observing, and his officers said, "Good luck, chap," or basically the summation said, good luck, chap," and let him through. And legitimately, he was the only one in his whole group to survive, and there were only 3 survivors in total. And when a magazine explosion happens like that, basically everyone dies pretty much instantly. And you can see also the admiral went down. So not just the captain of the ship, the admiral's also gone. So now Prince of Wales' captain's basically on his own to figure this out with the turret down and your flagship gone, which basically means you need to get out and disengage. You don't win this engagement.
She sunk with her entire 1,400 men crew. Just 3 seamen survived.
Yeah, so 1,418 and 3 survived. So I was a little bit wrong on the numbers, but still, it's catastrophic.
But the battle didn't end. The Prince of Wales adjusted her course to avoid the sinking wreck of the Hood, and soon suffered concentrated fire from both of the German units, which were both well positioned to switch targets. The distance between all opponents decreased, allowing even the Prince Eugen to fire its secondary armaments and prepare torpedo tubes. Both of Lutyens' warships scored hits on the remaining British unit, causing medium damage. The Prince of Wales, clearly at a huge disadvantage, launched a smokescreen and began to retreat.
Which is what you do in this. You need to get out. I mean, that's it. And they're so close that Prince Eugen's like 105mm guns were starting to be able to open fire with, and his torpedoes were being able to use. Now, HMS Prince of Wales is going to break contact here. Now, Lutyens is going to do something that's controversial, quote unquote, but we'll get to that.
A few more salvos were fired by both sides as the distance between the enemies increased, but none reached their targets. The short yet shattering battle of the Denmark Strait thus came to an end. While the Prince Eugen was essentially intact, not having been hit in the battle, the Bismarck was damaged. Her speed was slightly reduced due to the flooding of one of her boiler rooms and suffered a slight list to the bow and port side. What was more worrying was that one of the British shells had ruptured her bow, causing flooding of one of her forecastle tanks and causing her to slowly leak precious fuel. Lutyens was considering his options. He was aware that the British would seek revenge for the loss of their symbolic battlecruiser, but he didn't know that the Royal Navy had employed the majority of its available warships to seek and destroy the German task force.
So let's take a look here. So right now, HMS Hood has gone down. The flagship's gone down. Prince of Wales is, for all intents and purposes, out of action for the rest of this engagement. It can technically come back, but it really is out of action. You have King George V that's been scrambled. You have HMS Victorious, a carrier, least decently modern. You have HMS Repulse, a very old battleship by this point. And you have HMS Rodney it actually has the biggest guns that the British have at 16 inches, I believe. But it is very slow. That's the problem. And Lutyens didn't pursue the Prince of Wales, and he could have. Now, you have to remember that his orders were to get to France and raid. And if he took an engagement with Prince of Wales, he didn't know if there were British units in the area. He could have walked right into the entire fleet and lost everyone, okay? That he would have gambled on that to take down the British battleship, and that wasn't something he was ordered to do, and it's not something he's going to do. Instead, he's going to try to continue his mission, which is get to France and commerce raid.
The hunt for the Bismarck was about to begin. The hunt for the Bismarck has begun.
All right, so I will leave it there, and we'll just read some of these if you guys want, and we'll just go from there. The British battleship HMS Prince of Wales sailed to challenge the Bismarck's task force with her crew still not completely trained and still with Vickers engineers on board examining technical malfunctions on the ship while at sea, which is true, especially with this quad turret. And that was a real problem for them. Following the magazine explosion on the Hood, Squadron Commander Lancelot Holland made no effort to escape the sinking ship and was last seen sitting in his admiral's chair. And he went down with his ship. British stoicism. And even if he got out, and let's just hypothetically say he did, only 3 people survived. Because again, the Prince of Wales had to get out of there. You had to survive in the Atlantic Ocean, and it's very cold. It's not. And German Naval Command, including Grand Admiral Admiral Erich Raeder, strongly believed that the war against Great Britain and France would not break out until at least 1944, which is what I have said. Raeder urged Hitler and the Kriegsmarine requested at least 5 more years to be able to fight Allied forces at sea on equal terms, which wasn't going to happen because Britain and France would just build more ships. Nevertheless, Germany was at war with both France and United Kingdom since 1939. So, with that, we're going to wrap it up. Hope you guys like this. If you do, please leave a like and give me your thoughts in the comment section. Otherwise, if you like my stuff, you can subscribe. I'll see you people later. Bye bye for now.